Welcome to the podcast from CommonWealth Magazine. I'm Michael Jonas. We are in the final hours before the preliminary election for mayor in Boston. There is still a lot that's up in the air, but here's one thing we can say with some certainty. For the first time in the 199 years since Boston's incorporation as a city, its next mayor will not be a white man. Much has been made of the historic field of contenders, and we are taking one last look at the race before the September 14th preliminary narrows the field to two finalists who will square off in November. And helping us do that are two insightful sons of the city. Shagun Idowu is president of the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts. Welcome, Shagun.
Thanks for having me.
And Larry DeCara is a former Boston City Councilor with some firsthand knowledge of running for mayor. He was a candidate in the 1983 race. Welcome, Larry.
Great to be here.
Shagun, what have you made of the race overall? We have 5 major candidates competing on Tuesday. 4 are women, all identify as people of color. That's a sea change for Boston, but has the race lived up to its promise of really opening a new chapter for the city?
Well, it's like I said the other day that, for the first time, as you said, in the 199 years since we were incorporated, that the chief executive will not need a crash course in understanding the lived experiences of half of the city's population. I think that's an incredible feat for the city that's been plagued by lots of issues over that history. Has it lived up to the expectations? I think it certainly has. I mean, for me, the great thing about having multiple people of color running in this race means that we're focused on substance rather than the symbolic nature of what was just stated. So yes, we are going to have our first person of color, potentially a first woman mayor, but a lot of the race has been focused on the issues rather than just stopping at the fact that the person will be different.
And Larry, what has struck you about the campaign? How has it stood out from mayoral races over the decades?
Well, Michael, I've been around for a lot of them, and there doesn't seem to be as much campaigning because of COVID, and it's very difficult to, for example, walk into a hall and speak to 500 people and have your 3 minutes and then go to another place. So the old-fashioned retail politics is more difficult in this environment. I think all the candidates have been trying hard to get their message out. I get emails, I get texts, I get hard copy mail as well. I think most of the voters in the city do. And I think they're all significantly different people. And they have different opinions about police, about development, about the schools. I mean, John Barros in that first debate basically said, hey, the whole idea of deseg was to make life better for black and brown kids. I'm not so sure it is. I thought that was an extraordinary statement from a candidate. I think he's probably correct. So they're all out there. All the 5 major candidates, and I think it's going to be really close.
Yeah, let's talk a little about the dynamic of the race at this point. And we have had a fair amount of polling so far, and in I think virtually every poll is showing City Councilor Michelle Wu in the lead. And the more recent polls, she seems to be opening up some real distance between herself and the pack. So many people think she's a lock for first place now and a spot on the November ballot. And that has really turned this into a contest for second place, which will earn another candidate, a ticket to the final election. And that seems to be a 3-way scramble now between acting Mayor Kim Janey and 2 city councilors, Andrea Campbell and Anissa Asabi George. How does that sort of dynamic look to you at this point, Larry? And do you think that's right, that that's the real issue as we go into the final hours here?
The real issue is who votes. And the turnout in a mayoral election is about half the turnout in the presidential election. Presidential election runs much younger. It's more single people, more people who are from out of town, for whom who's on the city council just is not as important as the folks who grew up in Dorchester or JP or wherever. And when Walsh and Conley were in that primary with a lot of other solid candidates, I believe the number who voted was 113,000. One of the polls polled people who voted in 2020, And I thought that was a false report because there's no certainty those folks will show up any more than they showed up 8 years ago. And they didn't. And traditionally, the people who vote year in and year out are older people. Many of them are white. They're public employees. They're retirees. They're people who've lived in the same neighborhood for a long time. So there's no question as to where the polling place is. And that tends to skew the electorate a bit more towards the middle, remembering that even someone who's thought of as a moderate in Boston is a lefty in most of the rest of the country.
Yeah. And Shagun, what do you make of that issue around the turnout? Because we keep, we've obviously tracked the big changes in the city's population, the demographics, but I think as Larry's suggesting, voter turnout, especially in local races, is kind of a lagging, you might say, indicator of those changes, and that the turnout, the more local the races, the more the electorate looks, frankly, more like the Boston of old than the Boston of today. So, is that do you think that's a real dynamic going into Tuesday? And does that worry you in terms of, who is it that's going to be sort of at the table making this decision?
Well, low turnout always worries me. I think we all want to live in a world where as many people as possible are taking part in free and open elections. That's what one of the pride and joys of this nation. But the low turnout, I think about my community. I mean, in these preliminary elections, for sure, our turnout is usually much lower than our turnout for the November elections. And I think for a community that wants to see an African American in the seat and potentially keeping our current acting mayor in this position, it's going to be important that we do turn out. Folks will say they want to keep someone on a phone call, but if you don't show up to the polls, it's not going to happen. And that's been the conversation that I've heard from different friends and family. So there's a lot of work to try to get folks out. COVID certainly is hampering those efforts, but to be honest, in the past, it's been tough to get people out. I will say too that what's been interesting is, I don't know if it's because there are so many candidates of color. I don't want to say that, but the lack of enthusiasm in a lot of folks, compared to other races, if there were just one or two, I wonder if that might have changed things as well, in terms of folks really paying attention and being involved and saying, yeah, we got to go out and make sure my preferred candidate gets elected.
So you're saying that there might be kind of a almost kind of perverse inverse effect, that this kind of field of candidates of color has kind of in some ways lessened the kind of enthusiasm in communities of color, if they sort of say, well, we see who the field is and we think there's going to be a positive change in
right.
Whoever wins. Yeah, that's
right.
interesting. So I just wonder on that same in that same vein, Shagun, there's been this particular subplot, I think, in the race about whether the city will elect its first Black mayor, or frankly, even whether one of the three Black candidates, who are Kim Janey, Andrea Campbell, and John Barros, will be in the final election. That's not a foregone conclusion at this point. I mean, what do you make of that kind of subplot? Is that issue one that you think is really active and kind of one that people are focused in on, or is that more kind of us chattering folks in the media or pundits that are focused in on it?
Well, that's always the tough thing to parse out. If what the pundits are saying is what is reality on the ground. I mean, for sure, it is a concern. I mean, I can say that that a lot of the text threads I'm in, or the dinner table 6 feet apart conversations I'm in, are folks really wondering if, as you said, if the three African American candidates will make it to the final round. I think ultimately we will see, even though across the city there's usually low voter turnout, I think we'll see a lot of our folks come out for that reason, to try to make sure that an African American doesn't make it to the top two. Just to at least have someone in that race. I think it would be unfortunate if in this historic moment for the city that we come just that close, but don't actually make it that far. I think for the psyche of African Americans in the city, but overall, just for robust conversation in the final round.
There's another variable here, and that is there are open seats for the city council in Districts 4 and District 7. Turnout often comes from the bottom. So if there are 10, 12, whatever the number is, active candidates campaigning at the churches and at supermarkets, wherever they might be, they may stimulate the turnout in District 4, which is, I would say, 70-75% African American, and District 7, which is maybe closer to 60. I haven't seen the census figures for this year, but I've drawn a few lines in my day, so I know where the people live. And I think all of those candidates identify as African American. There may be a few who identify as African, which is a fascinating development unto itself. But I think that'll help the turnout, up the turnout in Districts 4 and 7.
Mm-hmm. And we should just note that not coincidentally, those are the two district council seats that have been held by the two Black women running here, Andrea Campbell and Kim Chaney. And talk a little about that dynamic that's playing out between them. I think early on in the race, I mean, frankly, neither Campbell nor Chaney had a particularly high citywide profile by virtue of being district councilors. They both have had stints as the city council president, which again is more of an insider thing. I don't think that alone gives you tremendous amount of added visibility. And it happens that Kim Chaney's turn at that position coincided with Marty Walsh's departure. And that is, in fact, why she's the acting mayor. I think that that dynamic and people looking back to 1993, it seems maybe every 30 years or so, we have a dynamic where somebody's in the council presidency. Larry, you held that position at one time. And it's kind of like musical chairs. It's a bit of an honor to hold the gavel and then your turn is over. But then every few decades, a mayor has, for some reason, another opportunity arises, they leave and bang, you're in the mayor's seat. And that certainly worked well for Tom Menino. In 1993, I think there was an assumption that Kim Chaney would kind of parlay this into, if not a certain victory, into a full term, that she would certainly be, I think a good bet to make a final election with all of the advantages that come with that position. She's also held it for several months longer than Tom Menino did. But it hasn't seemed to turn out that way. I mean, we're in a really tight race. The polls are essentially showing a dead heat with between Chaney and Andrea Campbell, with Anissa Sabi-George also right there. Is that surprising? And I don't know, what does that say? Does that say something about how she's handled these 6 months or so in office? They always say an election's a referendum on an incumbent. And here we have, this kind of odd situation where she is a sort of quasi-incumbent.
Michael, I can't prove it, but it may have been easier for Tom Menino to have been acting mayor for 10 weeks than for Kim Chaney to be acting mayor for 6 months. Because at least in 1993, not a lot of bad things happened over that summer in Boston. And he almost coasted into the final election and then was big time over Jim Brett. And when you're there for 6 months and let's say the school bus drivers, a bunch of them didn't show up yesterday, or the buses were late, or whatever the case might be. Good Lord, if you are a parent and you stand in the rain with a 4-year-old for an hour and the bus doesn't come, you know what? You're blaming the incumbent. And that's the reality of politics. When I was acting mayor, we had the blizzard. And people blame Kevin White. He wasn't even in town. So, I mean, it's tough. And I think Kim has had a bit more on her plate than Tommy did 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah, what do you think about that, Shogun? And the other thing I just think is a little different is we've had a couple of these candidates, certainly Michelle Wu and Andrea Campbell, they were running for mayor, starting a year ago this month, last September. Others, John Barros, had run before. I think Anissa Sabi-George, a citywide councilor, had been eyeing the race. So of the 5 candidates, Kim Chaney is really the one who you had never heard any talk about mayoral ambitions. So it seems to me there's almost a little bit of a mismatch or an imbalance. She's the one who landed in the role, having to sort of show if she's up to the job. But of the five, she's the one who hadn't really particularly set her sights on that. And so is that sort of showing itself in these months, Shagun, or how would you size things up?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the sort of difference too. At least, I mean, I wasn't. I was 5 years old when Mayor Menino became the acting mayor. So I can't say whether or not that's just true or not, but my understanding is that, he also had his sights on the mayor's seat. And so the opportunity presented itself. So therefore, he was preparing for the role. Whereas, as you mentioned earlier, acting Mayor Janey is coming from a district seat, and that was her main focus, was solving the problems that were facing Roxbury. And so for one day to wake up and find out that you're now going to be running the whole city, where you're focused for the whole time and for the foreseeable future, in your mind, you were just focused on one part of the city, I think is, kind of tough to deal with. And so I think she's done a fine job of having all that thrown in her lap, particularly given all of the challenges facing the city. I also think, even based on how all of us treated her ascension to the role, for me, honestly, whenever we have changes like this, first Black woman in the seat, where everyone's been talking about one day we need to make sure there's a person of color here and a woman in this seat. I feel like also a lot of expectations or there was a lot of high expectations placed on her shoulders that she was just going to come in and solve the problems and, coast to a full term. And I think we really did not understand that, tough challenges for someone new in the seat to all of a sudden be given these problems to manage. So I think she's done an RA job for someone who did not expect to be mayor anytime soon.
I would agree with that, and that's, I think, why she's registering in the polls. She's a very decent woman. I don't think anybody questions that. The reality is Menino chaired Ways and Means for 8, 9, 10 years, and he was quite prepared. Plus, everybody knew Flynn was looking on his way out. And Tommy had also worked for Joe Timilty when he ran for mayor. So I think he had 2 doses of the mayor disease, which most city councilors, including me, had a very bad case of. So you go to sleep at night as a city councilor, you wake up, you're the mayor, and you got a bodyguard and a car and an elevator of your own. And then you wake up, you really wake up, and it's not true. So I think every council thinks of it a bit. I think Tommy thought of it a lot, and I'm not so sure Kim thought of it as much, given that she was so focused on her district and also very committed to educational issues from her background as an advocate.
And we've heard, I think, a lot in this race about housing. We've heard about police reform, complicated problems of homelessness and addiction centered around Mass Ave and Melnia Cass Boulevard. Are there really important issues that either of you feel like we just really haven't heard enough about or anything about?
Well, Michelle Wu's proposed abolishing the BRA, and I have the paper on my desk at the office.
Or the now BPDA.
The BPDA, and I'm not sure we've heard much of that at all.
You're right. That has not really figured that prominently. How about is there things, Shagun, that you have wished to have heard more about that haven't arisen in the race?
Yeah, well, I mean, at the forum that we were proud to be able to co-host with CommonWealth Magazine the other day, the first issue out the gate that we brought up as BECMA was about small businesses. All of the candidates have some line in their policy platform or plans that small businesses are the backbone of our economy, and we got to make sure we do what we can to support them. But haven't heard a whole lot in a lot of the forums about the detailed plans to do just that, just beyond the fact that we have to support them. And the question that was asked was about not just helping to save small businesses who are still experiencing the devastating impacts of COVID-19, especially as we think about the fall and the impact that Delta will have on them, but really how we're planning for the future to ensure that small business owners are being strengthened, but that we're supporting new entrepreneurs in emerging industries in the city. Lots of life sciences buildings are popping up around the city. So how are we going to make sure that it's Bostonians or Boston-based businesses that are able to take advantage of that and grow in those industries? Haven't heard a whole lot about that. And that's going to be vital if we're going to have an equitable economic recovery in the city.
Yeah, I'm struck by, the absence of some of that talk. And I guess I also, maybe this is cynical on my part, and the focus on housing is obviously, it rates at the top, I think, of most polls of issues of concern. And I'm not saying that the mayor can't do something, but it also strikes me as such a sort of macroeconomic problem that affects the region and the state. And I wonder if there's if it's a little out of whack, the amount of attention to it versus the degree to which a mayor is going to be able to do more than kind of push on that, sort of at the margins, versus some of the, help for small businesses, or take something like the schools. That's something the mayor really has control over. It's very hard to reset a raging housing market, on the East Coast where all these global forces have conspired, and state laws and other things around development have inhibited housing. Schools is another issue, which I think we've heard something about, but it feels like every election we hear about how important it is. It's at least a third of the city's budget. Yet it feels like for decades we've been talking about the kind of troubled state of the schools. You are both, proud graduates of its system, and sort of maybe like the way Andrea Campbell talks about how it did right by her, but it doesn't do right by a lot of kids. And yet, I don't know, have we heard enough from the candidates beyond kind of broad brushstrokes?
We have a school system where a third of our schools are effectively in receivership. They don't say it's receivership, but it's some type of a state influence over what goes on. That was somewhat delayed by the pandemic. That's because they're in the 10% lowest of the state in all basic barometers. And it's not for a lack of money. We're spending $1.3 billion. The number of students keeps going down. We're below 50,000. So we're at like $24,000 a child. We have classrooms which are effectively empty. We have buildings which are heated for small numbers of students. We have buses which are empty half the time. You really got to, in my opinion, start from scratch.
But what do you really think about all this, Larry? Tell us.
I have plenty of opinions. And on top of it, we have a superintendent who doesn't have a license.
Well, although as of today, we're recording this on Friday, I just saw that the test came back and she is now fully certified. So we can check that box off.
All right, good.
Shogun, what do you make of this issue of the sort of the never-ending kind of evergreen issue of the state of the schools and in relation to the mayor's office? Because as folks know, we've got a system in Boston where we handed control of the schools to the mayor back 30 some years ago as part of an effort to increase accountability for their performance.
Yeah, I know that there's an effort underway to go to an elected school committee because folks are getting tired of waiting for the administration, whoever's in charge, to fix these issues. I have to say, going to Boston Latin Academy, yes, that opportunity worked for me, but like you said, it doesn't translate for everyone else in the rest of the school system. So things have not changed. I mean, when you say start from scratch, even going down to just the buildings themselves are all old World War II buildings. I used to work for Councillor Charles Yancey, and that was the biggest thing that he always talked about. And that's why he wanted to build a new school in Mattapan, because all the buildings were built in the early 1900s. So I actually don't know what the issue is. To what Larry was saying, tons of money is available. I feel like a lot of it is that there are a whole lot of programs that are duplicative. In my understanding, I guess there just needs to be more. One of the things needs to be that there's more conversation with parents on the ground, bringing folks in the same room. I feel like every stakeholder is talked to in a separate place as opposed to everyone being together to figure out how to solve the issue. Lots of top-down approach to fixing this, which has resulted in where we are today.
Yeah, well, and just to sort of wrap things up here a little, just both talk a little about sort of more on the ground, what you'll be looking for on Tuesday. What is it gonna, obviously the order of finish is the first thing everyone's gonna be looking at, but what other dynamics are you gonna be looking at in terms of turnout, where it happens, and who turns out, and how could that provide some clues to what lies ahead in November?
Well, it all depends upon the numbers. If the turnout is high in Jamaica Plain, Back Bay, Beacon Hill, South End, I think that's good for Woo. If the turnout is good in West Roxbury and Dorchester, I think that's good for Asabi George. If the turnout is good in the core of the city, in 8, 9, 11, 12, 14, 18, those wards, that's good for Kim, Janie, and it's good for Andre Campbell. And if the turnout is lower, and if I get turnout numbers at 8 o'clock, I can almost predict it. If the turnout is lower in X region or Y region, you can almost determine the result.
Well, what I will expect on that day is to first be on the phone with Larry for most of it to get his ideas on where things are headed. And I expect I'm actually being flooded with text messages even in this very moment. And my phone is on silent, but I can see the messages popping up of folks saying, make sure you get out to vote and all that. So, I will hope to see a huge ground game from all of the candidates, the folks running for mayor, folks running for council, to mobilize and get folks out to the polls. Because, to be honest with you, there are folks who, even during some of the forums earlier in the week, who can't tell the difference between the candidates. So I think that's been an interesting development as well. So I hope to see more folks from the campaigns getting folks to the polls, because I think there are some people also who don't know that it's primary day as usual. So that's the hope. And we'll be lending ourselves to that as well.
We will just leave the conversation then at that and echo that call. If you're a Boston resident on Tuesday, make sure you get out and vote. And with that, I want to thank you, Shagun and Larry, for this great conversation. And thank you all for listening to another episode of the podcast from Commonwealth Magazine. We'll see you next time.